Laura still remembered the sound of the rain on the day her husband was buried. It was light, almost gentle, but it felt heavy inside her chest. Years had passed since that day, yet the memory never truly faded. Daniel had been her world. He was kind, quiet, and always thought of others before himself. When he died suddenly in a car accident, Laura felt as if her life had stopped moving, while the rest of the world cruelly continued. After the funeral, the house felt empty. Too quiet. Daniel's shoes were still by the door, his jacket still hung behind it. Laura moved through the rooms like a stranger, touching things that no longer belonged to a living life. At night, she lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the echo of her own breathing. Grief was not loud. It was slow and constant, like a shadow that never left. Daniel had always been close to his mother, Evelyn. He called her every Sunday without fail. He helped her with bills, groceries, and small repairs around her apartment. Laura admired that about him. It showed his heart. After Daniel's death, Evelyn seemed to shrink into herself. Her voice on the phone sounded thin and tired. She cried often, reminding Laura how alone she felt now that her only son was gone. One evening, a few weeks after the funeral, Laura sat at the kitchen table with unpaid bills spread out in front of her. Money was already becoming a worry. Daniel's income was gone, and her own job barely covered rent and food. Still, her thoughts kept drifting to Evelyn. She imagined the older woman sitting alone, staring at family photos, waiting for a call that would never come again. That night, Laura made a decision. It was not dramatic. There was no long speech or deep thinking. It simply felt like something she had to do. She would send Evelyn $200 every month. It was the amount Daniel used to give her, and continuing it felt like keeping a piece of him alive. In her heart, Laura told herself it was not just about money. It was about loyalty. About love. About honoring the man she had lost. The first transfer was sent quietly. Laura did not even mention it at first. When Evelyn noticed and called her, she cried again, thanking her again and again. She said Daniel would be proud. Those words stayed with Laura long after the call ended. For the first time since his death, she felt a small sense of peace. As if she had done something right in a world that felt completely wrong. Months passed, then years. The payment became a routine. Every month, Laura checked her account, sighed softly, and sent the money. Some months were harder than others. There were times she skipped meals or delayed buying new clothes. But she never missed a payment. Not once. Each transfer felt like a promise renewed. Outwardly, Laura moved on with life. She worked, paid bills, smiled at coworkers, and nodded politely when people told her she was strong. Inside, she carried a quiet loneliness. She never remarried. She rarely spoke about Daniel unless someone asked. His memory was something she protected, like a fragile glass kept safely out of reach. Evelyn, on the other hand, slowly changed. Her calls became shorter. She no longer spoke much about Daniel. Sometimes weeks passed without a word from her. Laura noticed this but did not question it. Grief, she believed, affected everyone differently. She told herself Evelyn was just learning how to live with the pain, the same way she was. Still, there were moments when Laura felt a strange unease. A pause in Evelyn's voice. A coldness that had not been there before. Once, when Laura mentioned how tight money had been that month, Evelyn responded with silence, then quickly changed the subject. Laura brushed it off, telling herself she was being sensitive. One night, as Laura lay in bed, staring into the dark, she thought about the promise she had made years ago. She wondered if Daniel would still want her to keep it. She wondered how long she could continue. But every time doubt crept in, guilt followed close behind. Stopping the payments felt like losing Daniel all over again. She had no idea that this quiet routine, built on love and loss, was standing on fragile ground. She did not know that a single moment, a single discovery, would soon change how she saw everything. For now, she continued as she always had, believing she was doing the right thing, unaware that the promise she made after loss was leading her toward a truth she was not ready to face. Laura's life settled into a rhythm that felt safe but heavy. Each month followed the same pattern. She woke early, went to work, returned home tired, and waited for the calendar reminder that always came near the end of the month. When she saw it, her chest tightened slightly, but her hand still moved without hesitation. She logged into her bank account and sent the $200 to Evelyn. The moment the transfer was complete, she felt both relief and quiet fear. Relief that she had kept her promise. Fear of what would happen if she ever failed. Money was never easy. Laura worked as an office assistant, a job that paid just enough to survive. Her paycheck disappeared quickly into rent, utilities, groceries, and transportation. There was no room for luxury. No vacations. No savings worth mentioning. Sometimes, when her co-workers talked about weekend trips or new furniture, she smiled politely and stayed silent. Her world was small, carefully balanced, and fragile. On difficult months, she counted every dollar. She bought cheaper food, skipped coffee, and wore the same old shoes even when the soles were worn thin. She told herself it was temporary. She told herself it was worth it. After all, she was helping her husband's mother. She was doing what Daniel would have done. Evelyn still called sometimes, though not as often as before. When she did, her voice sounded calm, almost normal. She spoke about the weather, about her neighbors, about small aches and doctor visits. Rarely did she mention Daniel now. When she did, it was brief, like touching a wound and pulling away quickly. Laura listened carefully, always gentle, always respectful. She never complained. She never mentioned how hard things were for her. In her mind, Laura built a story that made everything make sense. She believed Evelyn needed the money badly. She imagined her struggling to pay rent, to buy medicine, to live alone in her old age. This belief helped Laura push aside her doubts. It gave meaning to her sacrifices. There were nights when Laura sat alone at her small dining table, eating a simple meal, and thought about how different her life had become. She had once dreamed of children, of a bigger home, of growing old beside Daniel. Now, her future felt unclear. Empty, but controlled. Supporting Evelyn became a purpose, something steady in a life that had lost direction. Friends encouraged her to move on. They suggested dating, starting fresh, thinking about herself. Laura nodded, but their words felt distant. She did not feel ready. Part of her felt tied to the past, not just by love, but by responsibility. As long as she was sending that money, Daniel's story was not finished. Neither was hers. One afternoon, Laura received a call from Evelyn that felt different. Evelyn sounded irritated, not sad. She complained about rising costs and hinted that $200 did not go as far as it used to. Laura listened quietly, her heart sinking. She wanted to explain that her own expenses had increased too, that she was barely managing. But the words stayed trapped in her throat. Instead, she apologized softly, even though she did not fully understand why. After the call ended, Laura sat in silence for a long time. A strange feeling lingered in her chest. It was not anger. It was confusion. She replayed the conversation in her head, wondering if she had imagined the sharpness in Evelyn's tone. In the end, she convinced herself it was stress. Old age. Loneliness. Anything but something darker. As time passed, the payments continued, but the warmth faded. Evelyn rarely said thank you anymore. Sometimes she did not even confirm she had received the money. Laura noticed, but she kept going. Stopping felt impossible. The promise had become part of who she was. Late one night, Laura opened an old box filled with Daniel's things. Letters, photos, small objects he had kept for years. She held a picture of the three of them together, taken long before everything changed. They were smiling. Happy. She wondered if that version of herself would recognize the woman she had become. She whispered into the quiet room that she hoped she was doing the right thing. There was no answer. Only silence. Unseen by Laura, the balance she had carefully maintained was beginning to crack. Small signs were appearing, subtle but real. And though she tried to ignore them, the truth was slowly moving closer, waiting for the moment when it could no longer be hidden. The first clear sign came on a morning that seemed ordinary. Laura was checking her bank statement while drinking a cup of weak coffee before work. She liked to keep track of every dollar, mostly because she had to. As she scrolled through the transactions, her eyes stopped on the familiar transfer to Evelyn. But something about it felt wrong. The date was different. It had gone through 2 days earlier than usual. At first, Laura assumed it was a simple mistake. Maybe she had sent it earlier without realizing it. Grief had taught her that memory could be unreliable. Still, a quiet discomfort settled in her chest. She tried to brush it away, telling herself not to overthink small things. Later that day, she called Evelyn, just to check in. The phone rang several times before it was answered. When Evelyn finally spoke, her voice sounded distracted, almost rushed. Laura mentioned the early transfer casually, hoping for a simple explanation. Evelyn paused, then laughed lightly and said she must have needed to move some money around. The answer felt incomplete, but Laura did not push further. After the call, Laura sat at her desk at work, unable to focus. Her thoughts kept returning to that pause, to the way Evelyn's voice had shifted. It was subtle, but Laura felt it. A crack, small but real. Days later, another strange moment followed. Laura received a message from a number she did not recognize. It was short and confusing, asking if she was still sending the money this month. The name at the bottom was unfamiliar. Laura's heart raced. She did not reply. Instead, she stared at the screen, reading the message again and again, trying to understand what it meant. That evening, she called Evelyn again. This time, her voice shook slightly as she asked if everything was all right. Evelyn sounded annoyed. She said Laura worried too much and that the message was probably a mistake. She quickly changed the subject and ended the call soon after. Laura sat alone on her couch, holding her phone, feeling foolish and unsettled at the same time. She told herself she was imagining problems where none existed. Evelyn was an older woman. Technology could be confusing. Numbers got mixed up. These things happened. But the feeling did not leave. Over the next few weeks, Laura noticed more changes. Evelyn stopped sharing details about her life. When Laura asked gentle questions, the answers were short and vague. There was a distance now, a wall that had not been there before. Laura felt as though she was slowly being pushed outside a door she had once been invited into. One afternoon, Laura ran into an old friend of Daniel's at a grocery store. His name was Paul. They spoke politely, catching up on small things. Before leaving, Paul mentioned that he had seen Evelyn recently. He said she looked well, even cheerful, and talked about plans to move to a better place. Laura smiled, but inside, her thoughts twisted. A better place meant higher rent. How could Evelyn afford that? That night, Laura could not sleep. Questions circled her mind. She replayed every conversation, every small change she had ignored. Doubt felt like a betrayal. Questioning Evelyn felt like questioning Daniel himself. Laura hated that feeling. She wanted to believe everything was as it should be. The next month, when the reminder appeared to send the money, Laura hesitated. Her finger hovered over the screen. Her heart beat faster. For the first time in years, she considered not sending it right away. The thought filled her with fear and guilt. In the end, she sent it. But something inside her shifted. The trust she had once given freely was now guarded. She began watching more closely, listening more carefully. Laura did not know what the truth was yet, but she could sense it waiting ahead. And she knew, deep down, that once it revealed itself, nothing would feel the same again. The truth did not arrive all at once. It came quietly, in pieces, like something fragile breaking in slow motion. One afternoon, Laura took a half-day off work to deal with paperwork she had been avoiding for months. Among the old documents, she found letters from the bank, insurance forms, and a thin envelope addressed to Evelyn that had been returned by mistake years ago. Laura had never opened it. At the time, she had simply forwarded it. Now, without fully understanding why, she opened it. Inside was a statement from a small investment account. Laura's name was nowhere on it. But what caught her attention was the balance. It was far higher than she expected. Far more than someone who depended on monthly support should have. Her hands trembled slightly as she reread the numbers. Her first instinct was denial. Maybe it was old. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe Evelyn had received a small inheritance or help from someone else. Laura tried to calm herself, but the unease grew stronger. That evening, Laura made a decision she never imagined she would make. She called the bank listed on the statement. She explained that she had once helped her late husband manage his mother's finances and asked general questions. The employee did not share details, but said enough to confirm one thing. The account was active. And it had been active for years. Laura ended the call feeling numb. Her hands were cold. Her thoughts felt distant, like they belonged to someone else. She sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the wall, as memories rushed in. Every skipped meal. Every delayed bill. Every quiet apology she had whispered to herself. Still, part of her resisted the conclusion forming in her mind. She wanted to hear it from Evelyn directly. She needed to give her a chance to explain. The next day, Laura called Evelyn and asked if they could meet. Her voice was calm, but firm. Evelyn hesitated, then agreed. They chose a small cafe not far from Evelyn's apartment. When Laura arrived, Evelyn was already there. She looked well dressed. Her hair was neat. She did not look like a woman struggling to survive. Laura noticed everything. They talked about small things at first. Then Laura gently asked how Evelyn was managing financially. Evelyn smiled and said she was getting by. Laura nodded, then slowly placed the bank statement on the table. For a moment, Evelyn said nothing. Her eyes dropped to the paper, then quickly looked away. The silence stretched between them, heavy and uncomfortable. Finally, Evelyn sighed. She did not deny it. She said she had savings. She said the money Laura sent made life easier, more comfortable. She said Laura had offered it willingly. Laura listened quietly, her chest tight. She asked about the strange message, the early transfers, the distant behavior. Evelyn's answers were short. Defensive. She said Laura was reading too much into things. Then came the words that broke something inside Laura. Evelyn said she had assumed Laura would keep sending the money forever. That it was her responsibility now. Daniel was gone. This was what a good wife would do. Laura felt tears fill her eyes, but she did not cry. She felt something colder instead. Clarity. In that moment, she understood that the promise she made had slowly turned into an expectation. Her kindness had become a habit others felt entitled to. The grief she carried had been quietly used against her. Laura left the cafe without finishing her drink. Outside, the air felt sharp. She breathed deeply, trying to steady herself. The truth hurt, but it also freed her. For the first time in years, she saw her situation clearly. And she knew that what came next would change her life in ways she had never planned. After that meeting, Laura did not sleep for days. Her body was tired, but her mind refused to rest. Every memory replayed itself with new meaning. Moments she once believed were loving now felt heavy. Words that had sounded grateful now felt planned. She kept asking herself how long it had been happening, and why she had not seen it sooner. Guilt tried to return, but it did not stay for long. Each time it appeared, the truth pushed it away. Laura reminded herself that kindness should never feel like a trap. Love should not demand silence or suffering. A week passed before Laura found the strength to act. She did not rush. She thought carefully, because this decision was not only about money. It was about respect. It was about finally choosing herself. She called Evelyn and asked to meet again. This time, Evelyn sounded cautious. They met at Evelyn's apartment. The place was neat, warm, and comfortable. It did not look like the home of someone barely surviving. That sight alone made Laura's heart ache. They sat across from each other. Laura spoke slowly, her voice steady but quiet. She said she had kept her promise for years because of love for Daniel. She said she never regretted helping, but she could not continue living under an unspoken expectation. She explained how much she had sacrificed, how alone she had felt, and how hurt she was to learn the truth this way. Evelyn listened, but her expression remained firm. She said Laura was overreacting. She said Daniel would be disappointed. Those words stung deeply, but Laura did not break. For the first time, Laura spoke with strength. She said Daniel had loved fairness. He would never want her to suffer quietly. She said support given freely should never turn into obligation. The room felt tense. The air was thick with unspoken anger and disappointment. Evelyn finally asked if the money would stop. Laura nodded. She said she would send one final payment. Not because she owed it, but because she wanted closure. She said after that, the payments would end. Evelyn's face hardened. She accused Laura of being selfish. She said family should not abandon family. Laura listened, but the words no longer controlled her. She stood up, thanked Evelyn for the memories they once shared, and walked toward the door. As she stepped outside, Laura felt her legs shake. Tears finally came, but they were different from before. These were not tears of loss. They were tears of release. That night, Laura sent the final payment. Her hand trembled, but her heart felt lighter. When the confirmation appeared on the screen, she closed her laptop and sat quietly. For the first time in years, there was no reminder waiting for the next month. No obligation hanging over her head. She knew the pain was not over yet. Healing would take time. But she also knew something important had changed. She had faced the past. And she had chosen herself. The months that followed were strange for Laura. Life did not suddenly become easy, but it became quieter. The constant pressure she had carried for years was gone. When the end of the month arrived, there was no reminder on her phone, no familiar knot in her chest. At first, the silence felt uncomfortable. Then, slowly, it began to feel like peace. Laura focused on small things. She cooked proper meals again. She replaced her worn shoes. She even opened a small savings account, something she had never allowed herself to do before. These were simple changes, but each one felt like a step forward. Evelyn did not call. Weeks passed, then months. Laura expected anger, blame, or guilt to follow her, but none of it came. The absence of contact was painful, but it also confirmed what Laura had already learned. Their connection had been built on expectation, not care. At night, Laura often thought about Daniel. She wondered what he would say if he could see her now. She imagined him listening quietly, the way he always had, then nodding with understanding. That image brought her comfort. For the first time since his death, Laura allowed herself to grieve properly. Not just for him, but for the years she had given away out of fear. She cried when she needed to. She spoke his name without guilt. She let go of the idea that love had to mean sacrifice without limits. Slowly, Laura began to rebuild her life. She reconnected with old friends. She accepted invitations she once declined. She laughed again, softly at first, then more freely. The future no longer felt empty. It felt open. One afternoon, while cleaning, Laura found a note Daniel had written years ago. It was simple. Just a few lines reminding her to be kind to herself. She held it in her hands and smiled through tears. She finally understood that honoring someone's memory did not mean losing herself in the process. Love could be remembered without pain. Promises could end without betrayal. Laura moved forward carrying her past with her, not as a burden, but as a lesson. And in that understanding, she found something she thought she had lost forever. Her own life, waiting patiently to be lived again.